Hello, and welcome to today's webinar presented by Andrew Foy of O3 Solutions, building a business case for AWP, selecting the right projects, and calculating your ROI. Today, we'll be walking you through actionable steps you can take to build a business case for AWP, and by the end of today's presentation, you'll be fully prepared to create a plan for AWP implementation. And just as a reminder, you can submit your questions throughout the presentation through the GoToWebinar panel, and we will answer them towards the end. So with that, we'll dive into the agenda. Today, we're going to be talking about how AWP costs money to do on a project and can provide significant benefit. We want to discuss how to address the financial aspects of implementing AWP within your organization. And specifically, we're going to cover how to build a business case, calculating the return on investment, considerations for picking a pilot project, and the available reference material. So first, let's just do a quick safety moment. As things start to come back to normal, I'm sure some people are going to music festivals and other festivals that they may go to this summer. And some tips to keep in mind: just stay hydrated, drink lots of water, make sure you're not eating food that's been sitting out for a long time, use plenty of sunscreen, take breaks to go to the shade, know your own limits, just pay attention to what your body's telling you. Don't indulge in too much alcohol, especially in the heat, and stay with friends or family. And if you see anybody else that seems to maybe be in distress, you can always call for help and contact the nearest emergency personnel. So with that, I'll introduce Andrew Foy, today's presenter. He has over 17 years of industrial construction experience. He's the Director of AWP and Construction Excellence here at O3. He's got an extensive AWP background. He's served on many boards and committees. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew. Welcome, Andrew, and thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful. Good morning. Thank you, Tari. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from here today. I'm just going to turn off my camera so you can focus on the presentation rather than on me. Get this thing out of the way. Okay, so like Tori mentioned, today we're going to be talking about business case. So in terms of a background, AWP is a massive juggernaut now. It started off 15, 20 years ago, and it seems to be growing at a very, very, very fast pace. More and more companies are starting to implement it. We're seeing more and more companies, especially owner organizations, putting it in as a requirement into contracts. Most companies, though, have an interesting approach to getting into AWP. Oftentimes, there's a lot of hesitation or reluctance about getting into AWP, particularly from the financial standpoint. People are worried about what the cost is going to be, and they want to understand those costs and the benefits before they start their AWP journey. So today's presentation is especially geared towards people who are going to be the AWP champion for an organization. And in that case, typically what you'll find is just saying, trust me, AWP is going to be a good start, or it's going to help our company, quite honestly isn't good enough. You will get, and if you'll excuse me stealing Mr. Tom Cruise's image there, you're going to get, if you're standing in front of your senior management board and saying, we want to do AWP on this project or within our portfolio, you will always get the, at some stage, show me the money conversation. So first thing we're going to do today is talk about what it means to create a business case. Three key things that you're looking for when creating a business case. First one seems like a fairly simple concept, but an AWP overview. Do not expect, do not presume that the people you will be presenting to understand what AWP is. It's a fairly large concept in a lot of places, but for some companies it's still a new concept, a new proposal for them. So you'll need to understand to your management team what it is. You'll also then need to go on to the business case. So you've explained what it is, then you're going to want to explain the basics of AWP, and unfortunately, one of the most things you're going to have to focus on is the financial aspect of that implementation. Then, once you've discussed the what is it, why are we doing it, you can focus on the how are we going to do it. So you're going to look at providing a very high level implementation plan for AWP execution. Now, All I will say on that one is not all AWP implementations are created the same. There is not a single set way of doing this. We have clients who choose to implement AWP right from the get-go for the full size of the project, right from early engineering stages all the way through to construction and commissioning. We have other clients, and a lot of people will start by focusing on the construction phase only, and then they'll pull it back into those engineering stages. So what we're looking for here is, with that implementation plan, is an understanding of how you as a company and you as an AWP champion are going to look at providing this strategy for implementation within your organization. Okay, so the first one of these, we're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail. So like I said, the first thing you need to do is provide education. Some companies have no idea what it is. There is no point standing up in front of people and saying, we want to do advanced work packaging, if you're going to get a series of blank expressions back. So the way I've done this in the past, and the recommended approach to doing this, start with a problem statement. Start with a problem to understand what you're trying to solve. Use industry data as a basis. So you can say, historical norms in the construction industry have shown that there's been no improvement in productivity in the last 70 years, certainly in North America. But wherever possible, if you're using industry data, that's a great start. But wherever possible, tailor it to your organization. The more specific it is to your company, the more that the management's going to identify with it. So, none of this should be a surprise to them. You need to understand that there's a problem or something you need to improve within the organization, and present that as the basis for doing AWP. Now, that could be a range of things. Typically, people focus on productivity. We need to get better. We need to get more efficient. We need to do more work with fewer people in less hours. That's definitely one region you can attack. And also, for example, you might have within your organization, we are excellent at pipe and steel, but our E&I performance in the field is always lagging. So maybe your initial focus for AWP implementation and workplace planning is just to improve your E&I, and then start to bring your pipe and steel numbers up even higher after that, and other disciplines to follow. Whatever it is, speak to the reasons that your organization might be struggling. Maybe you're not winning bids against your competitors. Maybe your safety record is poor. And maybe AWP will be a good way for you to help that structure of how to put in place a good safety record by having a better, well planned out project. So if you can't identify a problem, and this is a key principle, if nobody can agree that there's a problem, nobody's going to accept that they have a solution or need a solution to put in place. So if you have a management team, and I've worked with a lot of clients over the years who say, no, we're great. We're doing brilliant. We don't need anything else. The way we're doing things is perfect. It's very, very difficult then to get an agreement to do AWP. So then, once you've agreed there is a problem that you're looking to solve, provide an overview of what AWP is and how it can address those problems. So we've identified what the problem is. Now we're saying that we're going to use this to solve it. Be sure to spell out that it's not a new concept. You are not going to be a guinea pig here. It's been a CII best practice since 2015, and a lot of companies have implemented it. Nobody wants to think that most companies don't want to think that they're blazing a new trail. If you're a contractor, you're going to get left behind if you don't implement it. Like I said, more and more organizations are starting to put this into documentation, into the contracts, to say AWP is now a requirement. That may be the problem statement in and of itself. We want to win this job, and this job requires us to do AWP. For a lot of contractor companies, that is literally their gateway into AWP. And also, don't just focus on the changes. You need to be able to show that AWP can be incorporated into your existing processes. This isn't supposed to be, I always use the example of somebody throwing a grenade in a pond. This isn't supposed to be something that completely disrupts everything about the way you're doing work. I'm sure that a lot of things that everybody's individual companies are doing work very well for them. So all you're focusing on is the ways that this can be incorporated into your processes and make changes as minor as possible to minimize the change management, but still get the benefit out of it. So show the areas that won't be disrupted. You're still going to need a schedule, for example. You're still going to need an estimate. You're still going to need to do engineering. All that AWP is going to do is build on those foundations. So then once you've done that and you've explained what it is, provide details of the foundational structure of AWP. So with this, I always prefer to focus on construction-driven planning and construction-driven engineering. So what we're showing is a shift in the power dynamic away from, especially in the early phases, away from engineering being completely in charge of their own destiny and frankly, dropping stuff over the fence to construction as and when. We want to position construction as the leading customer, if you like, of that early phase work. So that's why we talk about construction-driven planning and construction-driven engineering. And bear in mind here, the advanced part of advanced work packaging only works if construction input is considered early in the project. So show the framework, show the structure of AWP, show its intent, and we'll cover some more of this in some detail here, and how it's going to provide your organization with the help and granularity to your project deliverables. Lastly, this is where you have to sort of temper things a little bit. AWP maturity. So this is a key concept when you're talking to your management team. Don't oversell it. The potential benefits of AWP, this is where, for example, anyone who's seen the CII research, the often quoted 10% saving in total installed cost. That only applies to AWP mature organizations. You will not get there on your first go. And anyone who's actually read that CII research can clearly show a maturity curve. So make sure that your management team understands this is not going to be an overnight success. However, you will still get significant gains on your first project. And every time you do consecutive and consistently after that, more and more projects, you're going to get better and better results every time. The only way to reach AWP maturity is to start. So don't promise the earth. I did, for example, was doing a mega project down in Houston area, and the expectation that we set for AWP was not even early or under budget. It was on time and on budget. And for a mega project, anyone who's seen the statistics knows a mega project coming in on time and on budget is a success. So we were using AWP as, in this case, as a risk mitigation strategy against previous performance on other projects that the company had done years before, to say we don't want to make the same mistakes. We want to be better prepared. We want to be better organized. And if we'd have told our management team that using AWP meant we could be on time and on budget, they'd bite your hands off for those larger projects. Okay. Once they understand what it is, you're into phase two. So this is where you're going to need to focus on the financial aspects. You're going to show that AWP is going to provide a benefit to your company. So some key things to bear in mind. Acknowledge the costs. Don't try to hide the fact that this is going to cost you money. You're going to need a budget for training. You're going to need technology. You're going to possibly might work with some external consultants to develop your process. You're also going to need to get people onto the project in earlier phases than you normally do. So for example, the only way construction-driven engineering is achieved is if you get the construction people in during the engineering stages, which oftentimes doesn't happen. Construction people are used to being told, here's a bunch of drawings, go. So if you need all this to happen, you're going to need to get management to sign off on those costs. So you have to acknowledge, you have to put your hand up to say there will be cost to this. To determine these costs, you can either consult return on investment tools, which we're going to get to here shortly, or you can get pricing directly from suppliers such as O3 and our training partner, Concord Academy. So, second step, you've acknowledged the costs. You said there is going to be a cost to doing AWP. Now you focus on the more interesting side of the coin, which is presenting the benefits. So this is the payoff. What are we going to get from doing AWP? And like we said before, keep it realistic. Don't oversell it. Don't advertise a full 10% TIC saving on your first job, but show that with repeated application and advanced maturity, you can get there. So show what the benefits are going to be first time out. And these ROI calculators that we're going to show you have a methodology built into them that they're flexible based on your level of maturity. So you can say, I'm doing a project for the first time, and it'll show you your ROI based on that, rather than if you upgrade to say, I've been doing this for 10 years and we're experts at AWP, the ROI calculation will change from there. So make sure that your company understands that this is an ROI for your first time out. And you can even show an ROI calculation for if we did the same project in 5 years' time, having become experts at AWP, here's the saving that we would get from there. Also, make sure to include the benefits that aren't cost related. Everybody, and like I said with the Tom Cruise thing, everybody focuses on the money, but money is very, very essential part of it, but there's going to be other benefits, including safety, which quite honestly should always be one of the top considerations on any conversation, quality, schedule performance, predictability, something as simple as getting the project delivered on time and when you said you were going to. Not forecasting, yes, we're going to be on time. Yeah, we're going to be on time. Yeah, we're going to be on time. Oopsie, no, we're going to be 3 months late. A lot of the times, these can be every bit as important as cost. Now, sometimes you might be doing a schedule-driven project. Suddenly, that's part of the reason that you need to be able to show the benefits for that. Setting targets. So agree what your implementation goals are and critically write them down. Get management to sign off on them. Agree them, discuss them in a meeting, but make sure they get documented and signed off, and make sure they speak to the issues that you're trying to fix. If you've agreed that your problem statement is we need to increase our safety performance, as opposed, as well as, or as opposed to, productivity or whatever, make sure that your targets focus on those things that you're trying to solve. So for example, if your goal is productivity, make sure that that's a key target, but also agree how much improvement you expect to see. So are you just targeting a 2% increase in productivity on your first project? Are you going to push for 5%, 10%? What you want to avoid is setting a goal of 20% improvement, having a pilot project that comes in with 15% improvement, which for any organization, if you told them on a first project you're going to improve by 15%, they should be absolutely delighted with that. But what you don't want to do is set the standard to say we're going to improve by 20, improve by 15, and have that considered a failure. It's not a failure. Make sure you have realistic expectations for this. Align on what that target is going to be. And then the last thing here with this is KPIs, key performance indicators. So targets are pointless if you don't have a way to measure them. So when we're talking about aligning on the target, what we're talking about is a measurable goal. Create and agree KPIs for each of your targets. Agree how they're going to be measured, by whom and when, or in some cases, how often, if it's going to be a repeated thing. Then use those KPIs to keep your management informed of your progress throughout the pilot project. They're going to want to know. Use it as a little scorecard. Send them a little weekly or monthly report saying, here's where we're at, here's what's going on. Color it red if it's underperforming, color it green if it's performing well. Simple dashboard type of stuff. And bear in mind, KPIs don't all need to be results oriented. So for example, you could have a set of KPIs that address the adoption of AWP. Are we actually doing it? And a second set of KPIs to address the benefits that you're seeing. So are we getting value we expected to get out of doing AWP? So it doesn't always have to be looking purely at, are we saving money? Okay, so now you've covered the what and the why. Now you need to get into the how. And like I said earlier, there's multiple ways of doing an AWP implementation. So the accepted wisdom 5 or 10 years ago used to be process technology. It was held to be true that what you needed to do was work on your process and have that completely finalized, which in some people's cases took months or sometimes years, and then start considering technology. Now, with O3 being built using those CII best practice principles, you can identify and adopt technology in parallel with your procedures. So the two of them are going to go hand in hand. There's no point doubling up on your change management effort and saying, right, we're going to go away and do a procedure and then come back and say, right, now we're going to do a technology, and have two sets of change management in your organization. You can accelerate your AWP maturity by combining that conversation around AWP process and the technology that should go hand in glove to support that. Pilot project, we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the key things to consider when picking a pilot project. but many companies will adopt the strategy of, we want to try this out on one project first. So that's what we mean by a pilot project. So we're going to try it on one project, and then we're going to expand from there. KPIs, we talked about earlier, measure your adoption and the results. And one of the key things with this is, don't always hold those cards close to your vest. Share your wins. People love to hear success stories, even in the moment. So if you're getting good results, publish them, share them, put them up on a whiteboard, put them, glue them to the wall in the corridor and say, look at what we're able to do. On the flip side, acknowledge and learn from your mistakes. You have set the stage. If you've done this properly, you've set the stage to say, like we talked about, you're not going to be perfect the first time out. You have to allow yourself to make mistakes. So as part of that, you're going to need to be able to explain what those mistakes are, put your hand up and admit them, and consider it a continuous improvement process. So this is where we get into those lessons learned and update process. Consider that continuous improvement as a basis for getting better at AWP as you go. Get feedback from the stakeholders. Don't operate in isolation. There's going to be a lot of people involved, often a lot of them on the outskirts of this. You're going to have, AWP sits in the middle of everything on a project. Every element of project execution is going to come across your desk in some way, shape, or form, whether it's estimates, schedules, manpower requirements, construction contracts, engineering contracts. All of that is going to play a part in AWP. You will have a lot of stakeholders to deal with. Some of them will enjoy the AWP approach, some of them will not. It's not always a question of just taking everybody's feelings on it, but solicit that feedback. Don't be scared to change your way of doing things. If you find a process that's better suited to your company, update your process. If you find that something's working really well, stick with it. If something's not working, it shouldn't be set in stone. That AWP procedure should not end up as a Rev 0 at the end of the year or at the end of the implementation of your first pilot project. Then, once you've collected those lessons learned, once you've worked out what works well for you, once you've modified and updated your process, then you're ready to start expanding out to other projects in your portfolio. And that becomes a lot easier when you can say, look at what we did. We did this project here, this pilot project, and here were the results. And a lot of times that expansion almost happens through osmosis, if you'll excuse the strange terminology. That happens because everybody else, the other project managers, will be looking over your shoulder saying, how did you manage to do that? How did you get that improved? I want some of that too. So it becomes much, much easier to expand once you've had that successful pilot project implementation. So these are the kind of things that you can explain to your management when you're building that business case and when you're building that presentation to say, here's how we want to do this. And again, bearing in mind, you want them to buy into the plan. So you have to sell it in a way that makes sense to them and to your organization. Okay, some key things to remember when presenting to your management. Give them time to ask questions. It sounds really, really fundamental, but don't expect to do a 45-minute presentation and walk out after 47 minutes. You want to make sure you save plenty of time either throughout the questions or at the end, throughout the presentation or at the end, for them to ask questions. They're going to have questions. That if they're senior management executives in a company, they're not just going to sit and nod their heads. Another key one, push for a decision in the meeting. You want to end the meeting, if at all possible, with a go, no go. Too many times, a lot of these meetings are, I'm going to present a bunch of information and then you're going to walk away. And I'm going to spend the rest of my month or quarter chasing around the senior executives who are in the meeting asking, hey, do you remember what we talked about? Are you okay with that? It's always, always best if you can push for a decision right there in the meeting. Get that agreement at the end of the meeting and walk out with a mandate to proceed. If they can't sign off on that because there are actions, follow up on those actions as quickly as humanly possible, reconvene and get that agreement in place once you've nailed down everything they asked you to follow up on. Document the agreements, especially targets. This is what I was saying earlier about write it down, do a minutes of the meeting, present those minutes of the meeting to the executive team who reviewed it. get them to agree that, yes, this is what we said we were going to do. Yes, these are the targets. This is what I'm going to be rated on as an AWP champion. If I'm saying that in my pilot project, we expect to see an increase in tool time of 5% against our previous projects, make that clearly identified and show how you're going to measure it. I'm going to go and do tool time studies every 2 months on the project. I'm going to compare those against previous projects that we've executed, and we were at 40% in our previous projects. Now we're at 46%, so we've exceeded our target of 5%. Make sure everybody understands what success looks like. Another thing that you want to get from senior management is their commitment to support the process, and that goes hand in hand with the last one, which is identifying a management sponsor. You want them to not just nod their heads and sign off on this and walk away. You need them to be visibly and vocally supporting of AWP. Now, what that can mean, for example, you're going to do AWP training for your team. Once you've been given the go-ahead to do this first pilot project that you're going to be doing training on, you're going to have the project team together and you're going to say, here's what AWP is, here's how it's going to be done. You're going to teach them what AWP means and how it's going to impact their team. What I've done in the past that worked very, very well is to get that senior executive, one of the people that you presented to and one of them who signed off on it, that management sponsor, get that person in the room for the first 5 minutes of the training and have them stand up at the beginning and them talk even before you get started in the training and say, we as the management team support AWP as a process. This is what we're looking to get out of this. You as the team that's going to be doing the pilot project, we're very excited, etc., etc. We make sure they know it's not just you trying to push this thing. If it's just you as the lone voice in the room at any one time, it's going to be a real uphill struggle. So that management sponsor should literally be somebody who's named, so that if, for instance, there's arguments or discussion or some issue over how to implement AWP, if you've got a project manager who says, I don't want to do it, this management sponsor should be the person that you can come back to say, here's somebody that you're going to need to answer to, project manager. You have to go and explain to this senior executive why we're not doing this, because this person is the sponsor for AWP in our organization. One other thing to consider when you're doing all this as well, by the way, is the timing. Don't expect that all of this is going to happen immediately, and don't try and do this a week before you start your project. Give yourself enough time to get this understanding with the management team, to get their buy-in, to define those targets, to get training done even when you've been given the mandate. Don't try to rush this out. You don't want to leave this management meeting and then say, yes, we've got a project that starts tomorrow, go do AWP. Things are going to take time. This is typically a process, especially if you haven't already defined your procedures and found a technology and got a solution. This could take months even before you're ready for that first pilot project. Okay, so we've talked a lot about return on investment, or we've mentioned what a return on investment is. So firstly, what we're going to look at is the first side of the return on investment coin, which is the costs. So what are the costs? And these are the things you need to acknowledge and understand. There will be financial involvement of things like earlier involvement of construction and commissioning startup personnel. Typically, those people are budgeted on a project from when they would normally be used, which in the case of construction people can sometimes be a month before construction. We're going to bring a construction manager on. You're going to want that construction manager and potentially, depending on the size of the project, other people earlier in the process so they can have a meaningful contribution during those early stages. You're going to need an AWP manager. You're going to need somebody who's going to champion AWP, which hopefully will be yourself, depending on your role in the organization. You're going to need engineering model data. Now, this is something that should be being done as standard, but unfortunately, in order to support, especially graphical workplace planning in the field, you're going to need a model with a lot of good attribution, a lot of good data behind it. So this is necessarily going to need to, sometimes that's going to increase the cost from engineering, especially in terms of model administration and data. You're going to need workplace planners, the people who actually build the packages in the field. You're going to need those people identified, brought onto the project ahead of the crew mobilizations. Those people should not mobilize the same day as the crew. They should be building the packages in advance of the crew. You're going to need AWP software. I mean, AWP technically, theoretically, can be done with Microsoft Word and Excel. I've done it that way. It's a giant pain in the neck, given the massive amount of information, and especially if you're doing model-based construction, the massive amount of data that goes with a modern construction project, having that software in place is going to provide you with immediate acceleration of your maturity and give you much better results for AWP implementation. And then also you're going to have costs for training. You need to explain to people what AWP is. There's different levels of training. Some people might just need, for example, awareness training. Some people might need practitioner training, which means they're actually going to be doing it. And then some people might need to be trained as work-phase planners. So then we've acknowledged the costs, we start to look at the benefits. And I've labeled this one as the tangible benefits. So what this looks at is, this is information from CII Research Team 319, which is where they documented and made AWP a best practice. And what they looked at was the improvements in things like cost, safety, schedule, predictability, quality, but everybody focuses typically on that productivity improvement as the most tangible. So you're looking at, even in the early stages, they showed improvements of around 10% in productivity, first time out, early stages of AWP implementation. And then as you move up that maturity curve, you can hit up to 25% improvement on your labor costs, which can, using some industry metrics, translate to that 10% of TIC savings. So when we say the tangible costs, this is the things that you can measure. This is the money that you're going to save. This is the obvious sort of benefit that comes out of AWP in terms of that ROI calculation. So then you can do this actual ROI calculation. In this case, as you see from the graphic on the right-hand side, the blue column represents the costs, the green column represents the savings. As long as the green column is taller than the blue column, you get the orange column, which says you're going to save money. So in this example, for what we've got here is a $100 million TIC, total installed cost project. And using this CII ROI model, we're showing a cost of just over 1.5 million and a saving of 11.2 million. So this is obviously a fairly advanced, high level, high maturity organization. If you did this for, we're just starting out for the first time, you're still going to get a good ROI, but it's not going to be nearly as good as 10% or 9.6% of your TIC. But in this case, for every dollar you're spending, you're saving $6, which is a good return by anybody's standards. So this is part of what you can include when you're doing your proposal and presentation to management. Bear in mind, timing is critical. Advanced work packaging, the whole purpose of the first word advanced is that you're doing this early. You will see an appreciable drop-off in benefit if you wait. You can still get benefit by just doing work-phase planning, which means you're starting the AWP process just before construction. You can still get some benefits by doing work-phase planning. We would never tell people not to do that. And some people, like I said, will start with that. And then they'll bring it back into detailed design and the early front-end loading stages, which, depending on your terminology, select, define, or pre-feed. The earlier you start, you have the greater ability to make meaningful changes to the project and the less it costs to make those changes. This is a very, very similar curve to those of you who've seen like an influence curve for constructability. Your ability to influence goes down through the phases and the cost to make changes goes up. So this is a very, very similar concept. Okay, there are going to be some difficulties with assessing ROI. Unfortunately, to truly understand ROI, you would need to run two parallel projects in the exact same conditions and say one of these is doing AWP and one of them is not doing AWP. And unfortunately, I mean, I've actually heard of one or two organizations that have done something similar with like different units, but it's not something that a lot of people do. So until then, what you're doing is always comparing against historical information and past projects. So what you're looking at is, if on our past project, we had a rate of placement of 6 hours per linear foot for pipe, and that's what we're estimating. If on our new project using AWP, we get that down to 5 or 5.5 hours per linear foot of pipe, we're getting better. And if you can show that again and again and prove that sort of repeatability of improvements using AWP, then you're going to be able to truly show here's the benefits we're getting out of it. Because you're always going to get into the whole correlation causation argument, whether AWP was responsible for the gains you're seeing on your pilot project. That's why you need to set the goals and agree that the measurement of those goals will influence whether you proceed with AWP after that pilot project. So like I mentioned earlier, it's not all about money. An AWP project, especially with the advanced level of planning that you're going to do, is going to bring benefits in other ways. And then these are a lot harder to measure. So you're going to see safety. If you've ever done a root cause analysis for a safety incident, a lot of times that comes down to something changed. The weather changed, or we didn't have the materials we needed for the job that we started the day doing, so we got moved on to something else and somebody got hurt. A lot of that comes down to lack of planning and reaction to changes. So the increased planning, making sure you have a very, very good coherent plan using AWP and work-phase planning will greatly increase your chances of operating in a better safety environment. You can also get greater results for quality. So you've got discrete work packages, fixed scope, and that horrible paperwork tsunami that you have at the end of a project where you suddenly got to do all of your turnover documentation and you've got to try and do a year's worth of work in 1 month to get the paperwork turned over, can be reduced by having these discrete, completable IWP level packages, and you can have sign-off and inspections done as you go. And the other thing is, one thing that I always find very, very interesting when talking to crews in the field, is a morale issue. People in the field want to do a good job. They want to be successful. They want to be efficient. They want to be effective in what they're doing. And if they keep being stopped from doing it because they don't have the material they need, or they don't have that drawing, or there's an outstanding RFI, and they keep being stopped from what they're doing and shunted onto something else, it's going to affect their enjoyment of their work. So by increasing the morale, what we can see is, by using AWP, what we can see is an increase in that morale. We can see people getting happier in what they do. There's other things as well: communication, reporting, information, visibility, predictability, trust. It's a very, very long list. A lot of it boils down to, do we know where we are on the project? Do we know how things are going? Are we actually going to get done on time, on budget, etc., etc.? Okay, selecting a pilot project. So what do we want to look for when considering how to pick a pilot project? Which is a lot of P's in one sentence, but bear with me. If you're choosing a pilot project, try to avoid choosing something that's halfway through its life cycle. As we've talked about multiple times in the last half an hour, advanced means starting early. So if you're going to pick a pilot, try not to pick something that's going to construction phase next week. Try and find something that's going to give you enough chance to have a meaningful impact in those early stages. Select a relatively short project, and I don't mean sort of 2 months, I'm talking a year or so, or 18 months. Something that's got enough meat on the bone for you to get your teeth into and actually make some meaningful changes, but also something that means you can implement, learn your lessons and improve, and then roll out those changes to the rest of your organization in a relatively short time frame. If you choose a 5-year mega project as your pilot, you're not going to be able to learn your lessons and implement and push out to the rest of your organization, typically until very late on in that stage. Pick a project that's got an appropriate level of complexity. You don't want something that's too simple, and you don't want something that's crazy complex that's going to take up too much of your time just figuring out. You want something that's kind of business as usual for the kind of projects you normally do, so that it can apply very well to the kind of things you're looking to solve in terms of the problems and issues within your organization. Find a project that's got a good ROI. Sounds simple enough, but find something where that ROI calculator shows you a good, clean, orange bar return on investment. And consider a project that includes all of the key disciplines you want to introduce to AWP. So if your focus is, like we said earlier, we want to improve productivity in E&I, there's no point selecting a piping only project. The last thing that you need to be clear on is picking the right team. So this is going to be as important as any of those characteristics we looked at in the previous slide. You want to find a team that want to make it a success, who can adapt their current processes. You don't want those people who are mired in this is the way I've always done it. So find people that can understand the benefits. Find people that know ultimately it's going to make them look good. It's going to show that they're executing their project earlier and cheaper and safer, for which they're going to get credit for that. You don't want people who can't accept change. You need to make sure that these people understand what about AWP is not going to change their product. Sometimes it can sound like you're saying that you're going to rip up the entire playbook for how to run a project and give them an entirely new process for it. It's not the case. A lot of things that your team is already doing and doing well aren't going to go away. All that AWP did when it came in was took the best things that a bunch of different organizations were doing, pulled it all together, standardized it, codified it, and gave it a name. So you want to give them a good, solid, repeatable process. And you have to bear in mind, I mean, certainly in my experience, a reluctant project manager or construction manager can kill an AWP implementation faster than anything. If they don't believe it, if they don't buy into it, if they don't support it, you're going to have a real struggle. But if the pilot is successful, that's when you're going to get those other project teams casting envious eyes at it and saying, what did you get? How do I get this? I want to be able to do this. Okay, let's look at some available resources. So the good news is we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of information already available about AWP. Much of this effort is being championed by the Construction Industry Institute in the US, which you'll hear many terms referred to CII. O3 is an active member of CII. 3 of the current subcommittees being chaired by O3 personnel. That ROI tool that we saw a snapshot of earlier was from the Performance and Benchmarking Subcommittee, which I chaired along with our CEO, Josh Gervin. So we're pushing a lot of information through CII because we want to make AWP a success within the industry. We want to get everybody on board with how this can be done. So a starting point to show you what's already available to you. This is the little GIF that's on the screen here. CII has compiled a landing page, as they call it, for AWP information. So under the resources, select AWP Overview. And from there, you're going to get into 3 different groups. They call it Discover, Engage, and Expand. So Discover is just getting started. Engage means we've got started and now we want more information, and Expand means we're getting good at this. Show me some things that are going to help me get really good at this. So if you're a CII member, or if you have any interest in becoming a CII member, all of this information will be available too. Okay, we talked about return on investment a couple of times. Again, there are tools available to help you with this. So that CII subcommittee, which was chaired by O3, developed the ROI tool for CII members. So it's on that CII website that I was just showing you under that resources tab. And that means that you can put in that example, you can put in 5 different little pieces of information about the project. And with just 5 pieces of information, the tool will give you a return on investment. Prior to that, O3 developed the first AWP ROI tool on the market. Now, this one's a little bit more complex. There's a few more moving parts. So it's something that typically we invite people to come and work through with one of our team members so we can help configure the results to your project specifications. And we can show you the benefits of AWP, both with and without technology on your project. There's a simplified version of this on our website. The link is right there. This can at least give you a starting point and say, here's to put some basic information onto the website, get an example of what your ROI is going to look like, and then you can come work with us to develop that more robust ROI tool. We are also currently in the process of creating what we're referring to as an AWP implementation toolkit. So the intent of this is to provide free tools, documents, and information for the open use of anybody looking to implement AWP. If you are an AWP champion, and if I had this multiple times in the last 6 or 7 years, where I was hired to be an AWP champion and given a blank piece of paper and told, figure it out. This is intended to be the starting point for you. So what we're looking to do here is give, as we're going to be building this throughout this year, And it's going to be, we've started off with things like learning about AWP. What is it? How do I find out what it is? We've got a section in there and a downloadable content for building a business case and ROI, choosing a pilot project, what to look out for. And then we get into some of the weighty things. We've literally written an AWP procedure for you. And it's all in, you know, these are all in native format. So you can literally go and download this AWP procedure, put your logo on it, change whatever details you want to change, and immediately you've got a starting point for an AWP procedure. And that's supported by AWP workflows. So throughout the rest of this year, as we're fleshing out the rest of this toolkit, we're going to be introducing things like, you know, how to build EWPs, how to build CWPs, how to do effective workplace planning, what KPIs look like, et cetera, et cetera. Basically building a full life cycle plan. And all of this is available free of charge on our website. So there's a link there. You can go and download those first tools that are available right now. So for the business case one, there's a PowerPoint presentation. And this is a short video showing what it includes. So it's going to take you through the challenges currently in the industry. It's going to show to you, these are the, you know, why are we doing this? And it's going to show to us, this is what I'm going to say to my management of the issues we're facing. Then we're going to say, here's what AWP is and how AWP is going to be the solution. We're going to say, what are the benefits that we can expect to get out of AWP? You can get up to 10% TIC savings. Then we're going to show you what AWP is. So we're going to show you how AWP relates to the project lifecycle and what the difference is between AWP and workplace planning. Then we're going to get into those foundational elements that we talked about, the structure of AWP. So we're going to look at construction work areas. We're going to look at what is part of construction. What are the core elements of the different packages, just the names, how those packages flow together, how that construction work area and path of construction supports the packages, and how we can use interactive project planning to support that process. And we can get into some of the benefits. What are we going to get from doing this? How is this going to help us? We're going to get constraint-free work packages. What are the benefits going to be, and how is the structure of that going to support the development of the EWPs, CWPs, the IWPs, etc. Then we're going to get into the critical conversation about AWP maturity, and this is the don't expect to be perfect overnight part of the conversation. Then we get into the business case. So we're going to show, here's our return on investment, here's what it's going to cost us to do it, and here's what we're going to get out of it. And after that, we're going to get into those implementation plan steps. How are we actually going to roll this out? What is our org chart going to look like? How many people are we going to meet? Then at the end of it, you have an opportunity to do the questions and decisions. Does anybody have any questions? Do we have authorization to proceed? That drive to acceptance and approval comes at the end of the presentation. So all of that is available as a PowerPoint for you in that toolkit. You can download it, you can use it to whatever degree you wish, take whatever of the information out of it and use it as a base point for presenting to your management team. And with that being said, we are now at the end of our presentation and I'm happy to take any questions. So Tari, do we have any questions that have come in while I've been talking?
Yeah, got a couple that came in, and just a reminder, if you still have questions, you can submit those over in your GoToWebinar panel. And another little reminder, you will get a copy of today's presentation, the slides, and a recording. So be on the lookout for that to hit your inbox in the next few days. So with that, let's check out some questions. What size project does the ROI calculator work for?
Any size. What you will see is if you get down to a project that's $100,000 or $500,000, it might be that the cost of doing AWP is greater than the benefits. So you'll see that very obvious cutoff point. But I mean, I've used the ROI calculator to the billions of dollars, and it still gives you results. There's no practical limitation on it.
Okay. And then does the business case change based on different industries?
It shouldn't. There's no reason why. I mean, ultimately, you're performing work in the field and you're trying to do that work efficiently. So the business case is we're going to use a disciplined approach to work packaging to execute work in the field. There are going to be some minor differences, with linear projects, like if you're doing a highway versus doing a chemical plant in a refinery or something. But in reality, what you're looking to do is make the field work as efficient as possible. And that's the main driver for that business case.
Okay, here's another one. On demonstrating the business case, who do we use actual numbers regarding cost reduction or benefits for a specific project ahead of the execute phase without benchmarking with similar projects, i.e. forward-looking?
All of the benefits information that we typically use is based on the RT 319, which is what used AWP or created AWP as an industry best practice. So the benefits will come from that, and the benefits scale from that. In terms of the timing, I mean, obviously a lot of the benefits are going to come during that execute stage in terms of showing the value of how AWP is going to be set up. So we have had some conversations where it's, people are trying to prove value phase by phase, which is a very difficult concept. You're looking at the project overall to say, and this is why you need to sort of adopt an owner mindset, if you like, to say, doing this, and especially potentially expending more money in the early stages, is going to save us money in the project overall.
Okay, and then is there any real example to present about AWP implementation?
Well, I mean, it's been implemented by hundreds of organizations throughout the world in the last 10, 15 years. A lot of the problem comes in these companies, the companies that have actually done it don't always want to present their information and say, you can use our information. Some of them will stand up at conferences, for example. A great source of information if you're looking for actual results and companies that are happy to publish that information is the AWP conference, which is run by Group ASI. And those will include presentations by companies who will stand up and literally say, here's a case study of what we did. O3 has a lot of those as well with the clients that we work with. Unfortunately, a lot of the time we have to sort of take the names of the companies out because of privacy concerns. But if you're looking for it, a great source will be those historical presentations from Group ASI and the AWP conference.
All right. Another question, what metrics have you seen used to demonstrate quality? How about planning?
Well, quality, you're going to get into, I mean, for example, for me, easy things like RFIs, rework. So, RFIs, are we looking at the work ahead of time? Are we constantly having people standing in the field because something's not working? What's my rework percentage? How long is it taking my quality person to approve each IWP? Something as simple as that. You can also get into the time it takes for the turnover inspections to be done and the documentation to be provided, the sort of quality verification documents against each work package. So anything that's going to drive quality to be more timely, successful, and involve less rework.
Okay, and then here's another one. What are the primary risks with implementation of AWP, and what recommendations do you have to mitigate them?
My first risk is always going to be reluctance. It's the apathy conversation about we don't want to do this. We've been doing it our way for 30 years. And that's a very, very hard battle to fight. And a lot of the times it boils down to education. I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years about, I don't need this. We know what we're doing. We're great at what we do. You need to make sure they understand the benefits to them. The AWP isn't intended to replace them in some way. It's not intended to minimize their impact on the project. It's intended to provide them with tools to get better at what they do. And something as simple as vocabulary, using the right words, is very, very important. And it sounds so simple, but I can't count the number of times I've heard people say, we are building AWPs. No, you're not. That's not a thing. AWP is the process. You're building IWPs or CWPs, but just something as simple as getting everybody using the same words. Like I sat in a meeting that I've been working with a construction manager, and after 6 months of working with this person who'd never done AWP before, finally in a meeting we were talking about something, and he referred to path of construction in a meeting with a bunch of other people, and it was like a light bulb moment. He'd obviously understood what we were trying to do, that we weren't trying to replace his expertise, that he was going to be central to this conversation. And it it was a brilliant reaction, and we got on very, very well in terms of developing. I think we ended up with an excellent path of construction on that project.
All right, so we probably have time for one more question. So here's, without doing a pilot, how do I introduce AWP in my project at the early phase and at the same time providing the business case to leadership without over-promising and really demonstrate tangible values for the project?
Well, wow, okay, multiple layers to that. So without doing a pilot project, you're basically, if you're not going to do a pilot project, you're implementing on a live project, which is essentially what a pilot project is. So if you're talking about implementing it across your portfolio, then essentially that's going to boil down to, at some point, you need a go, no go decision. You need to be able to show value. And like I said in the presentation, a lot of that boils down to, do we know that there's a problem that we want to solve? And you don't always need to go in full bore right from the beginning. For example, I was rolling AWP out to a small capital projects group in Texas at a refinery there. And one of the things we did was we said, every project must do a path of construction during FEL2. And that was kind of like a toe in the water step. And we didn't say we're going to do full work packaging on every project, but we said every project must have a path of construction. And what that did was it forced the project teams to incorporate and include the construction and commissioning people earlier in the project phases. And then from there, we were able to select the projects that needed full AWP. Some of them were small projects, didn't need it. Some of them were larger, more complex projects that would benefit from AWP. So there's also what we call a selection criteria tool that we developed for CII as well, that you can look at the different characteristics of the project and see which ones are going to most benefit from AWP, and that goes hand in hand with that return on investment tool.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Those are some great answers to some really great questions. So if we didn't get to your question today, please reach out to us. You can always email us here on the screen. You can email Andrew at o3.solutions or info@o3.solutions as well. You can find our contact info on our website, as well as all the resources we presented today. And also those are in the chat over here. There's links to each of those resources. And again, you'll receive a copy of this presentation. So you should be in good shape to get going with all this information. So thank you again for joining us. That's all the time we have, and we hope that you will stay tuned and join us for our next webinar next month. So stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.